David is lamenting to the Lord. And who is he lamenting to? O Lord. Lord, referring to Jehovah, the independent, self-existing, continuous one who needs no one and no thing to continue his existence. Now think about the name, Lord. Independent, self-existing. Everything in this world, everything in the universe is dependent. We need oxygen plus other things. An airplane needs an atmosphere, can't fly in a vacuum. A fish needs water. A train needs tracks. O Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? The historical situation reflected in the Psalms finds David at a moment in his life that has been building. David, we know, committed sin with Bathsheba. He had Uriah killed by the general sending him into the hottest part of the battle. That's in 1 Samuel chapter 11. In chapter 12, we find that David is confronted. David is confronted by the prophet Nathan. And in Psalm 32 and Psalm 51, we find David's confession. In chapter 13, we find Amnon and Tamar. Amnon faked sickness. He asked for his half-sister Tamar to be brought to him to care for him, and he raped her. In chapter 13, we find Absalom, 2 years later, kills his half-brother Amnon. Absalom flees Jerusalem, and he is away for 3 years. Absalom returns to Jerusalem, but didn't see his father, King David, for 2 years. Then Absalom has a conspiracy at the end of 4 years after returning to Jerusalem. And David flees the city because his son wants to take over the kingship. And then we find that Absalom is killed in battle, and David, again, is king. David flees, and as he is fleeing, he is cursed. That is by people standing by the roadside. O Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Because of David's sin with Bathsheba, his life was torn apart by family struggles. And again, a result of his sin. His kingdom was being wrenched from his grasp by Absalom. The hearts of Israel was basically with Absalom, his son. The anointed of the Lord, David, was forced to flee Jerusalem and wait out the crisis in an encampment on the other side of Jordan. Thus, the psalm reflects a national situation as well as a personal situation. O Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Many are saying to me, God will not deliver him. Again, Selah. David had been promised a kingship. He'd been promised someone to follow him on the throne. So his lament, and then in verses 3 and 4, we find a trust. Many are saying to me, God will not deliver him. But, contrast, you are a shield around me, O Lord. You bestow glory on me and lift up my head. To the Lord I cry aloud, and he answers me from his holy hill. Now let's go back to Genesis chapter 15. Look at a couple passages as we think about shield. A shield was an object used in battle. It was used in protection, depends on the type of shield. You could have a larger shield that would be used, and you could crouch behind it. Not as big as a door, but, a bigger shield where a soldier could crouch behind it, hindering the enemy's arrows. Then you had a smaller round shield. Here David is saying, the Lord is my shield. And in Genesis 15, we find that in Genesis 12, the Lord had given a promise to Abram that he would be blessed, he would have descendants, he would impact nations. In chapter 15, that is again affirmed. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. But Abram said, O sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eleazar of Damascus. And Abraham said, You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. God had given a promise of descendants to Abraham. There was no descendants at this point in time. So it's natural. What's going on, Lord? Then the word of the Lord came to him, This man will not be your heir, but a son coming from your own body will be your heir. He took him outside and said, Look at the heavens and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, So shall your offspring be. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. Notice back in verse 1, the word of the Lord coming to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram, I'm your shield. Let's go to another passage in Deuteronomy chapter 33. Deuteronomy chapter 33. Deuteronomy 33 and verse 29. Moses is blessing the tribes. They're going to soon enter the promised land. Moses is not going to be in the picture. There's going to be a new leader, and the new leader will be Joshua. In verse 29, Blessed are you, O Israel, who is like you, a people saved by the Lord. He is your shield and helper and your glorious sword. Your enemies will cower before you, and you will trample down their high places. Again, getting ready to enter the promised land. And the Lord is encouraging them through Moses. He, the Lord, is your shield, your helper, your glorious sword. And we know that they were going to be going into battle. They were going to conquer the promised land. And the Lord reminds them through Moses, He's your shield. It's your protector. Back to Psalm 3, but you're a shield around me, O Lord. And again, O Lord, independent, self-existing, continuous one, you bestow glory on me and lift up my head. David had been promised the kingship. It doesn't look too good at this point in time. So what's he do? He cries out aloud to the Lord. And the Lord answers him from his holy hill. He laments. He expresses trust. And in verse 5, I lie down and sleep. I wake again because the Lord sustains me. I will not fear the tens of thousands drawn up against me on every side. And what did he say earlier? How many rise up against me? Many are saying God will not deliver him. He cries aloud to the Lord, and then he says, I lie down and sleep. Here's King David, apparently thousands surrounding him, enemies surrounding him. And he says, I lie down and sleep. Ever think about rest in the midst of adversity? I lie down and sleep. I awake again because the Lord sustains me. I don't know how you are in your life, but I know in my life, when I have some things happen that are very dramatic, and I'm talking things that are not good, I tend not to sleep as well. My mind turns. I might go to sleep and sleep for a couple hours and then get awake and my mind just turns. David lamented to the Lord. He cried to the Lord. He answered, I lie down and sleep. The Lord sustains him. Instead of being vexed in his soul and making plans to relieve the pressure, he has learned to console himself with God. Too often, plans come before prayers. How many blessings are missed by God's children by conceiving their own plans and their own schemes only to see God frustrate them later, and he works out his plan anyway. The life of faith is one being protected by God's loving care, making the difference between despair and hope. I will not fear the tens of thousands drawn up against me. Seems to go back to verse 1. O Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? I will not fear. David, obviously in a tough situation, fleeing his own son, thousands against him. I will not fear. How often in Scripture is the idea of fear mentioned and the exhortation not to fear? I will not fear. Fear seems to be natural to us as humans. David laments to the Lord, I will not fear the tens of thousands drawn up against me. One commentator says, in the midst of torment, torture, and treachery, David smiled up into the face of God. Good night, Lord. I've done what I can. I put as much distance as possible between us and the foe. I posted a guard. Now do thou sustain our cause. And with that he went to sleep. There were tens of thousands of foes, for Absalom had the numbers, but David had God. That was David's vision. And then in verses 7 and 8, he moves into an assurance. Arise, O Lord, deliver me, O my God. Strike all my enemies on the jaw. Break the teeth of the wicked. From the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be on your people. Selah. It was a new day with God. David invoked the words of Israel's marching song, Arise, O Lord. The critical battle with Absalom and with the armed forces of Israel was still in the future. But David had no doubt about the outcome. Actually, God had already drawn the fangs of his foe. David did not know it. But away in Absalom's council chamber, sage advice of Ahithophel was already being discounted by the would-be king. His counsel of Hushai, the Archite, David's secret agent in the palace, was being put in its place. Arise, O Lord. Deliver me, O my God. Promises had been made to David concerning kingship and the future. He's responding in light of some of those promises. Arise, O Lord, deliver me, O my God. Strike all my enemies on the jaw. The striking of the enemy on the jaw is an expression of humiliation. Think about people fighting, the jaw being struck. Break the teeth of the wicked. Breaking the teeth is a metaphor that is used to liken to the enemies to a wild animal whose strength is taken away when their teeth are broken. An animal that doesn't have teeth is really limited. There can be a lot of growling, there can be a lot of threatening, but doesn't have a lot of bite. Over the years as I have jogged, one of the things that I have a fear of is dogs. Years ago I was jogging up the road and a dog came out and I thought, well, I don't have to worry about that kind of dog. Well, he came up behind me and, I get bit. I learned a lesson very quickly. The next morning, I carried a stick. I still carry it to this day. And a couple years ago, in my jogging, I jogged by this house for years and years. Never a dog. And one morning, I got almost by the house, going away from home, and this dog, big dog, barked. And I thought, I'm not sure I want to go back by there, but if I didn't go back by there, I would have gone an additional 7 miles. I didn't have the wind to do that. I came back by, and again the dog was there, and I thought, well, maybe I'll change my jogging route. There was fear. The type of dog probably could have done me in quickly. I learned later he was probably trained to stay in his yard. But what if that dog came after me and there was no teeth? Break the teeth of the wicked. Then David says, from the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be on your people. Not only about him, but may your blessing be on your people, the nation of Israel. Just a couple of thoughts in terms of application. Part of worship of the Lord is the freedom to lament in the midst of trouble. Part of worship of the Lord is the freedom to lament in the midst of trouble. Now let me add to that, even if the trouble is due to our own sin and our own failure. David is lamenting, and we know some of what he went through after his sin with Bathsheba and having Uriah killed. There was consequences to that, and he is suffering. But there's still freedom to lament to God. We blow it. We may fail at times, and there may be consequences. But there's still freedom to go to God and lament to him. I know, Lord, some of what I'm going through now is because of what happened in the past, what I did in the past. But I still have freedom to lament to you. How many parents question themselves and say, did I blow it with my son, with my daughter? And they run into some problems and they have that freedom to go to God with lament. How many move into adulthood and they look back and say, I'm paying some price for some things I did as a teenager or a young adult. Still the freedom to lament to God. We can freely express ourselves to the Lord. He already knows us. Psalm 139 makes that very clear. Be open and honest with God. 1 Peter 5 and verse 7. Casting all your care upon him because he cares for you. Hebrews chapter 4. Because of Christ and his going through suffering, he becomes our great high priest. And we have freedom to come openly and honestly before God. As you observe humans, one of the enemy's tools is that when we have blown it, and we may pay a price for that and go through a difficult later, he'll say, you don't have the freedom to go to God. What do you think God's thinking of you now? David lamented to God. And in the context of Psalm 3 and related psalms, there is hope when you sin as a believer. David sinned. He confessed. His communion with God restored. And he walked with God. The same would be true for us today. And don't be afraid to be balanced in talking with the Lord. You can express praise and adoration to the Lord, but also the freedom to express complaints. And as you express complaints, express confidence. As a local church, as a family, as a married couple, feel free to lament. In the context of lament, we want to sing together, Be Thou My Vision, keeping in mind that in the difficulty of life we can lament to God as we make him our vision. Singing together, Be Thou My Vision.